Dan Bongino, who for the last year has been the second most powerful person at the FBI, deputy director, deputy to the most powerful person at the FBI, Cash Patel, both of them former podcasters. Dan Bongino is an emotional, hothead conspiracy theorist who at times appears as though he is barely able to control his temper. He's a very, very, very emotional man. Some could argue that that type of temperament might not be ideal for the number two person at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But, you know, when Donald Trump came into office, after having been convicted of 34 felonies, after having committed multiple felonies trying to overturn the 2020 election, after having committed multiple felonies, including 32 violations of the Espionage Act and concealing classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, after having been adjudicated to be a rapist, after losing a fraud trial in which he and his sons were found civilly liable for a decade's worth of fraud, after his company, the Trump Organization, was found guilty of 17 fraud-related felonies at the end of 2022, when this country saw fit to re-elect a convicted felon, rapist, fraudster. Donald Trump then had the ability to select his own cabinet and his own staffing throughout the executive branch. He picked alleged alcoholic and accused rapist Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. He picked notorious sex pest, adulterer, philanderer, RFK Jr. To be Secretary of Health and Human Services, despite having been a heroin addict for 14 years, and despite having admitted to brain worm eating portions of his brain. But Donald Trump also saw fit to bring in Pam Bondi as Attorney General of the United States, who was Attorney General for the state of Florida from 2011 to 2018, a period of time during which Jeffrey Epstein was extremely active in the state of Florida, and Pam Bondi did nothing about that. So she's Attorney General. He brought in 2020 election denier Judge Box of Wine Jeanine Pirro to be the DC U.S. Attorney, who has been failing to get grand jury indictments left and right, and lost a misdemeanor trial against the sandwich guy when the jury acquitted him on misdemeanor charges after the grand jury failed to indict him on felony charges. And Trump brought in Cash Patel to be FBI director. Cash Patel, who had previously written 2 children's books about how the 2020 election was stolen. The Plot Against the King, spoiler alert, Cash is the hero. And Plot Against the King 2, 2,000 Mules, with a foreword by Dinesh D'Souza. Spoiler alert, Cash is the hero again. I will be doing dramatic readings of these books in front of my wood-burning stove on Christmas Eve next week. So just, calendar that. But Cash Patel and Dan Bongino, 2 podcasters, were now the number 1 and number 2 people in charge of the FBI. And Dan Bongino's out. He's leaving. Initially, his last day was going to be December 5th. His personal effects have been cleared out of his office. I guess officially his last day might be this coming Friday. I don't know. Who the fuck knows? But he cleaned out his office and he's not going back to the federal building, to the FBI building. And, you know, both of these guys ran into a buzzsaw when they got these jobs. Because, for example, 2020 election stuff, the base was like, okay, you got Pam Bondi in there as Attorney General, Cash Patel as FBI Director, Dan Bongino as Deputy Director. Where are all the prosecutions for the witch hunt? Why aren't we prosecuting Robert Mueller? Why aren't we prosecuting Jack Smith and all of these other people? Why aren't we prosecuting all the members of the January 6th committee? Our people are in there now. Why aren't we prosecuting those people? Because those people did nothing illegal. So Cash Patel and Dan Bongino ran into a brick wall of reality. Judge Boxaway and Jeanine Pirro has been running into that brick wall every single day and just keeps doing it because she's a drunk potato. And then that brings us to the Epstein files. Dan Bongino and Cash Patel for years had said there is absolutely an Epstein client list. He was absolutely blackmailing people. And there's all kinds of evidence that the government is covering up. And they both said repeatedly that Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. Then they got these jobs. And the base was like, all right, come on, give it to us. Give it to us. Where's the client list? Where's the client list? Pam Bondi said in February that it was on her desk and she was reviewing it and that it would be released. And then Dan Bongino and Cash Patel had to humiliate themselves by going on Fox News and actually saying, well, no, there's not actually a client list. He did end his own life. He was not murdered. And they said, they were both like, hey, if we had the evidence, we'd give it to you. They both had for years said that the evidence exists. For years when they were in private life. And I think that Dan Bongino's breaking point was this past July 6th. It was a Sunday. It was 4th of July weekend. And the DOJ, Pam Bondi, put out an unsigned memorandum about the Epstein files saying there is no client list. There is no evidence of blackmail. There is no information in the file to justify or predicate investigations into any other co-conspirators or any other people, meaning we're closing this investigation completely, and we're not going to release any more information, documents from the Epstein files. And it was reported that Dan Bongino, being an extremely emotional, hothead, conspiracy theorist, fragile man who can barely control his own temper, he got apparently into a screaming match with Attorney General Pam Bondi over that. And I don't think he ever recovered from that. I don't think his head was back in the game after that. We didn't hear a lot from him publicly. We didn't see a lot of interviews with him. He wasn't making a lot of appearances. And so who knows, man? It's like maybe for years, maybe he actually believed all of that shit that he was spewing on his podcast, where he would scream and yell and act like a giant emotional man baby frequently. But he's leaving. He's leaving the FBI. So I think that makes him kind of the first high-profile casualty of people who actually made it into the administration, not counting Matt Gaetz, who paid a homeless teenager $400 for sex while she was saving up for braces. And so he had to withdraw his nomination for Attorney General at the beginning of the year. But Dan Bongino, little Danny Boing Boing, Danny Bongina, is no longer at the FBI. And from the reporting that I've seen, rank and file FBI agents and staff are absolutely overjoyed that he is leaving.